Okay, so this is kind of a new project. I haven't even talked about this, but I just decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different going forward. So this is going to be a new podcast by me. This is called Deville Worship. It's a podcast where I worship myself through conversation, affirmation, and gratitude. That sounds so fake. What the fuck is wrong with me? I'm going to say podcast, but it's also kind of like a new series on this channel, and it's called Deville Worship. It's where I, Narcissa Deville, worship myself through conversation, affirmation, intention, and gratitude. And that's kind of a mouthful. So I want to do this. It's kind of going to be a different vibe. It's going to be more chill. Obviously, I am still going to, it's still going to be a video because that's what, everyone loves. But it is kind of just going to be more chill. I do have notes and kind of things that I want to talk about and kind of sections that I want for the podcast. So just to kind of give you an idea, because this is like a brand new thing, right? So I want to talk about kind of things that I'm unpacking in my life. I'm someone who, I've talked about this before, I was raised Catholic. I was raised Republican, and I was raised as someone with lots of different ideas and values that I personally no longer hold. And yet, I still feel as though I'm having to constantly unpack them. I'm constantly having to unpack my religious trauma. I am constantly having to unpack the sort of Catholic guilt that I have about just about everything, even though I have not been Catholic for a very long time, and I'm also having to unpack sort of my own personal limiting beliefs about just where I can be and who I can be and what I can do. And I'm constantly having to unpack and unlearn all of these things. Look, I am someone who I've had over the years a lot of internalized fat phobia. And so I am having to unlearn these things. I'm having to unlearn the years and years of trauma and the years and years of particularly Catholic guilt and Catholic trauma. So I wanted to make this podcast sort of to spend time with myself, but also with all of you, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's going through this, and I'm not the only one who has a lot of things that I have to unpack and unlearn, and sort of, things that I want to discuss and things that I want to sort of work through, and things that I think can help a lot of us spiritually, especially right now. I think now more than ever, obviously I always struggle with not wanting to talk about politics, but I feel as though, we need to have intentional, hope and positivity and things that we're working towards. And so one of the things that I want to do besides just unpacking things is I want to talk about things that I'm grateful for, and have a specific section of just gratitude and affirmations to myself and conversations that I want to have with you, the audience, where, you're talking about your own experiences with whatever. So I do have a couple of topics that I am going to talk about over the next couple podcasts, but I just kind of wanted to start this one, sort of a little introductory, but also just kind of getting you the idea of how this is all going to work. So bear with me. This is kind of going to be different. It's kind of going to be, what it's going to be for the first few podcasts. It's a new project, but I wanted to do this because I thought it would be interesting. Hiccups. I thought it would be interesting, but I also thought it would be a great way to just kind of work through some things that I've been thinking about and work through things that I was sort of taught and things that I think I need to unteach myself and unbelieve. And there's going to be, I think over time, there's going to be topics that are maybe heavier than others. Obviously, I think anytime you go through religious trauma, that's going to be a very heavy topic. And so there was a lot of things I've had to unlearn about that. And some of the things that I've unlearned over the years, I've done kind of privately with myself, and maybe those will come up later. But like one of the things I wanted to talk about is the topic that I feel like I've talked about a lot on this channel, and I feel like I've talked about a lot in general, but I still think it's worth discussing specifically for this first episode. And that is going to be the topic of success and what that means, and sort of the complicated beliefs that I think I've had around success, right? Because, in our very, without getting too heavy already right off the bat, but in our very capitalist society, right? I think there is always this thing where success is defined by monetary value. I think we have this thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, we all live under capitalism. We all have to survive. We all want to not have to worry. I think the greatest dream that most of us have at this point in time is being able to have enough money that we don't have to worry about money, that we don't have to worry about bills, that we can take care of our friends and family. I think for a lot of us, the idea of success at this point is just like base level. I don't want to have to think about it. You know what I mean? I don't want to be stuck in a job that I hate, but I also don't want to be like ever having to worry about money. That's kind of the baseline that a lot of us have at this point. And that's a really difficult place to be in. And it's a sad place to be in. And it's not a place that I want to be in. But on the flip side of that, I think one of the complicating factors about success is that there is kind of this push and pull that I feel, right? So on the one hand, you have the fact that success is very much tied into money, but it's also tied into, especially with like YouTube and writing and things like that, it's, tied into the algorithm. It's tied into money. Or not money, excuse me. I just said that. That's another thing. There's probably going to be significantly less editing, so you're kind of going to get me a little more unfiltered. So if I ramble, that's just what it is. Because I kind of want it to be like more conversational, feel more like an actual podcast, not necessarily just like a regular YouTube video. Like I have script notes, but this isn't scripted. Do you know what I mean? So this is kind of me off the cuff. So for me personally, right, when I think about something like success, there's the two kind of the push and pull. So on the one hand, there is the, YouTube version of success, which is like a certain number of subscribers, a certain view count per video, and therefore that is tied into, ad clicks. How many people are watching it clicks into how many people are seeing the ads and how much you are being paid by YouTube. But it also clicks into how seriously people are taking your content. The more people are subscribed to you, the more I think people tend to take you seriously, because they think, oh, well, a lot of people are subscribed to this, therefore YouTube is going to show this to more people. And for some reason, oh, excuse me. I think I got makeup in my throat. For some reason, I think we have associated subscribers with you are now a trustworthy source, right? I think, when you have a lot of subscribers, when you have a lot of eyes on you, when you have a lot of people watching what you're doing, we have decided that that person is more valuable. Let's say what they have to say is more valuable, what they have to say is more interesting, and therefore people generally are more willing to listen to them, and they get more views on their videos overall. And so it's like this big cyclical thing, right? So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where on the one hand, when you are, successful, quote unquote, as a YouTuber or even as a writer, I think success as a writer, it can vary depending on what your platform is. But let's say, I've used Wattpad in the past. Now, I would consider the fact that I got 50,000 reads in 2 weeks and it's been at 75,000, I would consider that very successful. I still get likes, I still get comments, I still get people who are finding my work for the first time and enjoying it. I consider that personally very successful. But when you consider that Wattpad is also the same platform where people have written stories that some people would argue are not, technically good, whatever, art is subjective, and that gets 100 million reads, 70,000, 100 million, you start to feel as though you're not as successful as you could be. And therein lies the problem too, right? Because I feel like a conversation about success cannot really exist without also having a conversation about, like, self-comparison, especially in something like YouTube, especially in something like writing and publishing. I think it's so easy to get bogged down in this world where you are comparing yourself to someone else. You're comparing your worth. You're comparing, what you can do versus what someone else can do, and what your success looks like versus what someone else's success looks like. And I think it's very easy to get very, very miserable doing that. And I am someone who has fallen down that trap many a times over the years. I would like to think that I am a lot better at it, and I have worked very hard to be better at that over the years. I've worked very hard to be someone who does not, compare myself to other people, because my journey is not their journey, right? Their journey is not my journey. And that's easier said than done. It takes a lot of work, and I'm not going to say that I'm perfect at it every time, because I know that that's something that sometimes is going to be a struggle. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to see people who, if I don't like their work and they are successful at their work, then I feel like, okay, what does that say about me? You know what I mean? And so you get into this position where you are comparing yourself to someone else, and you're comparing your work to their work, and you're also comparing your worth to your level of success. And I think that's where we really get into trouble, right? And again, this comes back to the whole capitalism thing. I think when success and self-worth are inherently tied together, you ultimately end up in this position where, how successful you are on any given thing that you do is tied up with how valuable you view yourself as a person. And that's not something that I am proud of about myself, and that's something that I'm working on about myself, but it is something that I fall into sometimes, and I've fallen into sometimes, is especially when it comes to YouTube. If a YouTube video that I made does very, very well, then I'm like, okay, that makes me feel better about myself. I get more subscribers, I get more people watching this, I feel good about myself. I feel like all the work that I am putting in, because it is a lot of work to do this, I feel like, okay, it's worth it. This means something, people care. And then on the flip side, when a video doesn't do so well and nobody sees it, and I'm like, damn, what is wrong with me? Why isn't this work? And so you get down that cycle of putting the entirety of your self-worth in how successful something is. And that's such a dangerous thing to do. And I also think it stops people from just wanting to make things for the sake of making things. It really, really does. I think personally, a lot more people would make a lot more just weird shit on the internet if we stopped caring about success. If we stopped caring about the algorithm and going viral and getting all this money. I think in a way, and people have talked about this a lot, right? You think about the old YouTube, people have for years been decrying the fact that YouTube isn't really fun anymore, that YouTube isn't interesting anymore. There's so many millions of views for, something like a Troom Troom video or a 5-minute crafts video or Mr. Roost. Can't say that. You know what I mean. Uh, Mr. Monster. There is this idea of, there's kind of this idea of you as a person, you want to enjoy this content, but a lot of the content just doesn't feel fun. It's all repetitive and it's all like very algorithmic, trying to get people's attention and like I don't have time for that. I'm not going to watch that sort of content and I'm not going to make that sort of content. And so inevitably I am someone who, I would hope, especially since this is a podcast, put me on in the background, just kind of listen to me when you're doing something else. That works for me. But I think some people will click off if they don't either feel that it's interesting enough or whatever. I watched this video because sometimes I fall down a rabbit hole of like, how do I make my videos more, interesting to people? And I fell down this rabbit hole where someone said that you have to have like a new thing on the screen, or some kind of movement on the screen every 20 seconds. And I just think that's not going to work for me, babe. I don't have the energy to like, I've tried to do that thing where like, when you cut, you zoom in or you zoom out or you do this or you do, like, I've tried to do that. I just don't have the patience, diva. I don't have the patience for that editing wise. I don't have the patience for that viewing wise. Like, I've tried. I think I tried watching like 1 5-second clip from a Mr. Monster video and holy shit, girl, that's exhausting. I don't know who the fuck that's for. That is exhausting. And you wonder why nobody can like concentrate for more than 5 seconds on anything. Like that will destroy your brain. That and ChatGPT, but that's a whole other conversation. Maybe that's a video for later. Actually, I do think I have a podcast topic about that. So hold that thought. But, what I mean is I think there is this thing, right, where as a creative, right, there is this thing where, as a creator, there's this thing where we, you equate your success, you equate your numbers, you equate how you're doing on the algorithm with your self-worth as a person. And that's such a dangerous game. That is so a way to make yourself miserable, to drive yourself up the wall. It's just such a bad idea. And again, I don't even think that it's intentional. It's just something that I think a lot of us end up doing because it's kind of how you get attention at this point, right? I think how you get people to give a shit about what you have to say, and we're all kind of screaming into the void. We all want to be heard. I think kind of the nature, unfortunately, of our, algorithmic based content world at this point is that we all kind of want to be heard. We all want to be appreciated. We all want what we have to say to mean something. And that's all well and good. That's great. But, you kind of have to I feel like you just kind of have to just do whatever you want to do, make the content you want to make if you want to make content. And you kind of have to separate yourself from the algorithm, and you have to separate yourself from what you maybe view success as, or what you've been told success is. Because that was kind of the other thing too, is like there's 2 points to the success thing, right? Success only looks like one thing, and that's X, and it's usually financial. But we've also kind of been told, especially artists, you are told you can't find success that way. Nobody can find success that way. It is a rare thing. One thing I heard a lot growing up was nobody makes money as an author or an artist. Now, that's not true. There are people who are very famously authors and very famously artists. Like, we know there are people whose jobs these are, or whose careers these are, whatever you want to call it. So, like, it's not exactly honest to say nobody does, but it's very, very, very few people. And as I think I've talked about in a different video, one of the issues is, I read a lot of books growing up about the craft of writing and publishing as a career or as a business and all of that. And so one of the things I read a lot growing up was just, almost no one is successful at this. Almost no one is going to be successful enough to do this as a full-time job. Don't quit your day job, as the old saying goes. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason that is the saying. I think people will tell people, hey, you want to do YouTube? Fine. Don't quit your day job. You want to be an artist or actress or singer or whatever? Don't quit your day job, because very few people are successful at this. Very, very few people make a full-time living at this. And I think when we, say successful, what we mean is either very few people are at the very top of this, or very few people can actually make enough money to kind of survive. And I think it's such a complicated thing, right? Because you are inevitably going to come up against the fact that you really have to unpack the way we look at success and the way we look at what it means to be successful. And I think one thing I have really had to unpack and I've had to learn is, what are alternative ways that success can look like to me personally? And I'm not saying that everyone has to view it this way. You have to come to your own decisions about what success means to you and what ways you can look at success. I think for me personally, at this point in my life, I have to look at success as something that, first of all, is kind of fluid, right? I think success at a certain point is fluid, it's changing, it is different it's very dependent, right? I think I am someone who has been very successful in writing. I have been successful. If you want to go by just pure view counts and reading counts, over the course of my life, I've had a lot of people reading my work. I've had a lot of people enjoying my work and commenting on how much that means to them, and commenting how much these stories meant to them, how much they love my characters, how much, different things have vibed with them, let's say. And that's, fan fiction and original fiction. I have experienced a great deal of that just in the last 5 years. So in that respect, I can say that I have been very successful. Now, has that led to me making money on that content? No. And so some people would say, or at least not yet, I should say. So some people would say, well, you haven't been that successful. And I have in the past said to myself, I haven't been successful because XYZ. And I think reevaluating that and reevaluating what success looks like and reevaluating what success means to me. And also, I think we need to have a serious look at whether or not success should be the end game of anything we do, right? Because something like art, let's say, something like acting, something like singing, something like writing, I feel like there's just not a thing where people can do this as a hobby, right? You never hear about someone who's just kind of allowed to sing as a hobby. You know what I mean? Like, you just kind of sing for fun. Maybe you put out music that, you put it on YouTube. If anyone sees the light of day, great. If not, it's not that big of a deal. It's kind of just a hobby. It's something I like to do for fun, And the same goes with painting. You don't really get to see a lot of people. I guess there are people a little bit more with painting, but it's very rare that you get to see someone who's like, I just kind of paint for fun. It's not something I'm trying to sell. There's always that pressure to try and sell your hobbies. There's always that pressure to monetize your hobbies, especially something like YouTube. Even if you start out doing YouTube for fun, which a lot of people do, as soon as you're able to monetize it, I think there's that pressure to monetize it. And then there is the pressure to, hit these goals and benchmarks and make a certain amount of money so that you can do that full time, because most of us, hey, don't want to have a boss. And part of not having a boss or being our own boss is you have to hit certain metrics and benchmarks in order to be able to survive. I think people have talked about that a lot of art is kind of been corporatized, and a lot of art, only rich people can really afford to make art for fun. You know what I mean? And so there's kind of a whole thing just about that, how art has kind of become kind of classist. And in a way, I can see that. I'm going to push back on that, because I think people will say like, oh, who has the time? You're working multiple jobs just to survive. I don't have time to, create art. I don't have time to write or, draw or whatever it is I want to do. It's really only people who don't have to work those multiple jobs who can afford to make art for a living and just do it for fun. And I mean, I understand why people feel that way. And I do understand that that is true to a certain extent. I think part of the reason that music and acting and all of that have become, very much the Nepo baby nightmare that we are currently living in is partly because we think, oh, you have a name, so we can trust that you know what you're doing because someone else in your family knew what they were doing. I don't know why that's the case. And I don't necessarily agree with that as a concept, but go off. So I would not necessarily say that I agree that inherently, if someone has a famous relative, that they are suddenly more likely to be good at whatever it is that their relative did. If you have a good actor in your family, that doesn't mean that you are going to know how to act. You know how to be around cameras. That does not mean you know how to act. That does not mean you are good at any of that. It's not something that's passed through genes, or at least I don't think so. I don't think art is something that's passed down. That's a whole other conversation, right? So, but part of the reason I think, we are in this position where so much of art is being taken over by people who are related to people who are already successful. Stephen King's son is a writer. Stephen King's wife is a writer, which I think she was even before they met. So that's whatever. But when everyone in your family is a writer, you're more likely to be able to just do that, right? I have joked that I think it's only a matter of time before, Miss J.K. Rowling's daughter ends up writing, or one of her children ends up writing, And of course, they're going to be taken more seriously than someone who is completely unknown. If an actor has, someone in their family is an actor, or, everyone in their family is an actor, it's going to be taken more seriously if their kids want to act. It's just one of those things that I think we've kind of decided that it's, for the people in charge, it seems safer. And I think for the rest of us, it's just kind of we don't have, it's a lot harder now than it's ever been to just kind of, be a middling actor, or be a middling singer, or be a middling writer or artist or photographer or whatever. It is, in some ways, it's easier than ever to get your name out there and to get seen. In other ways, it's harder than ever because everyone is trying to do it now more than ever. And I think, things are so expensive. It's not like it's really affordable. You can't, unless you've got 20 roommates. I think if you're someone who moves to LA and wants to become an actor, and, you're waiting tables and just trying to go to whatever audition that you can, it's hard because unless you have 50 roommates, most people can't afford to live in LA. Most people can't afford the, the money that it would take just to pay rent, just to live close enough to the studios to be able to go to an audition at the drop of a hat and hope that you get it. And inevitably, it's probably going to go to someone who's already in the industry anyway, which is extremely frustrating. And again, there is sort of a sameness, I think, right now with, the world we're kind of living in, right? Everything kind of feels homogenized. Everything kind of feels like it's the same thing. Every phone looks the same. Every house looks the same. Every car looks the same. Every laptop looks the same. There is this sort of homogenization that's very exhausting. I was just watching a video that was talking about this. So I'm not going to kind of go down the same points, but it's something that I've been talking about for a long time, right? I have a lot of frustration with how much everything looks the same. Everyone's doing the same makeup, the sort of cottagecore or, what would you call it? Catholic core trad wife bullshit is, popular now, and everything's going way more conservative. And that's kind of why I think I'm just like zero fucks given. I'm doing my makeup to the 12s, not even to the 9s, to the 12s, because I'm like, you know what? I would rather look just way too much than not enough. Like, I'm just going to, and yes, I'm in my goth era, so I'm wearing a lot of black. That is just what it's going to be. But my point is, I'm not trying to do the trad wife shit. I'm not trying to do the cottagecore shit. I just want to have fun, and I want to make content that makes me happy. And I also want to make content that I don't feel this pressure to, quote unquote, be successful. I don't feel this pressure to, fit the algorithm's rules of what you're supposed to do, of like, something new has to pop up on the screen every 20 seconds or no one's going to click away, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Like, I'm just kind of at the point where, and every time I've looked at my analytics, I'm like, I don't know what this means and it's depressing me, so I'm just not going to do it. Everyone wants short form content, but yet, we'll all watch a 4-hour Jenny Nicholson video on Disneyland. So, it's like choices. And again, she has built up that platform, so people will listen to her for 4 hours, presumably. I don't know, make of that what you will. But, most people say, oh, you got to do stuff for TikTok. You got to do stuff for short content. And I always mean to, and I always try to, and it just never quite works out. Anyway, not the point. The point of this all is, I feel personally like, I kind of have to reevaluate my relationship with success. And I want to reevaluate my relationship to what I view success as, what I view the nature of success, and what I view the nature of my success specifically. And I think for me, one of the things that I want to consider to be like, am I successful? Am I happy with what I'm doing? You know what I mean? Part of the problem is, there's been so many YouTubers lately who have gotten burned out and who have been making content for long time. And, part of the reason they stay doing it is because it's lucrative. But I think part of the reason they get burnt out is because they don't feel like they can make content that they love. They don't feel like they can make content that makes them happy because it doesn't do well, quote unquote, whatever that means. So, I think when you get stuck in this algorithmic when you get stuck in this algorithmic loop, you inevitably find yourself in this situation where you are having to, you're having to push yourself to like become whatever it is you think is going to be successful. You have to do content that is going to be popular and is going to follow whatever trend. Although I feel like that's kind of fallen off. There's not really YouTube trend. I know there's TikTok trends, but there's not really YouTube trends the way there used to be, which is kind of unfortunate too. No one's doing like makeup challenges. No one's doing boyfriend tags. No one's doing, cinnamon challenges, which is probably for the best. But what I'm saying is like nobody's doing like fun challenges anymore. They're not doing fun that, that may be all in the TikTok world. I don't know. I don't have the energy to go on TikTok ever anymore. But I think, for me personally, I really have to say about making content, like, it just has to, am I having fun? You know what I mean? Am I making content that makes me happy? Am I enjoying myself? Because if I'm not enjoying what I'm making, if I'm not enjoying what I'm talking about, if I'm not enjoying, this takes at least an hour, sometimes more, not including putting on makeup, not including setting up, the recording and all that other stuff. If I'm not enjoying myself, what the hell am I doing this for? Who am I doing this for? It's just not worth it to me to make content that doesn't make me happy. It's not worth it to me to make content that ultimately isn't enjoyable for me to make. You know what I mean? Like, I don't make enough from YouTube that I feel like I should even be giving a shit what the algorithm dictates. Because at the end of the day, like, if a video does well, great. I'm so happy that it did well. If it doesn't, like, I don't personally make enough from YouTube that I really want to be focusing all my energy on what the algorithm says I should be making. I want to have fun. YouTube is supposed to be fun for me. This is kind of something I love doing it. I do. I enjoy making YouTube videos. But I'm not going to enjoy them if I have to make content or I'm constantly feeling like I have to, change up my content and figure out something that's going to work and some formula that's going to get me more attention and get me more views and blah, 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 blah. You're just going down this rabbit hole. Like, that's just not, it's just not a fun time. And that's not how I want to spend my time on YouTube. I don't want to make content purely for the sake of trying to get attention or trying to get people to give a shit or whatever. Like, that's not how I want to do this. That's not how I want to spend my time as a YouTuber. That doesn't sound fun for me. Trying to balance all of those things. That's just not, I don't want to do that. That is not how I want to live my life. That's not how I want to, do my YouTube career. So I think it's really about reevaluating what success means to me and kind of affirming to myself that I am successful as long as I am happy making content that I love and that I want to make. I am successful as long as I am staying true to my vision of what I want my channel to be. And that's not just for YouTube. That's also for writing. Like, I think staying true to writing what I love is also important. I don't want to just write something because, that's what's popular right now. Everyone's into romantasy, so you got to write a romantasy. Everyone's into dystopia, so you got to write a dystopia. Everyone writes, vampire billionaires who abuse their girlfriends, like, so you got to write that. Like, that's not for me. That's not how I want to be as a writer. And so, like, if, to me, success as a writer and success as a creative, let's say, is, are you making content that is fun for you, that you enjoy? Are you making content that is kind of whimsical and just whatever the fuck you want? I think we need more weird, self-indulgent fiction. We really, really do. We, as a society, need more weird and self-indulgent art. And that's part of the reason, one of the many reasons why AI just is not going to cut it. Because it does not know how to be weird and self-indulgent in a way that I think is creative. Like, yeah, Shrimp Jesus is weird, but it's not self-indulgent and weird. Who is that for? Who is Shrimp Jesus for? Who is, like, all of the, John Oliver just did this video about AI slop, right? And, like, you see some of the shit that people make, and I'm like, yeah, it's weird, and some of it is, like, surreal, and some of it is, like, a lot of it is fucking dumb, but who is it for? You know what I mean? Who is this actually entertaining? No one. Part of the fun of, like, weird and surreal art and art that is just kind of, out there and whatever, part of the allure is that it's self-indulgent. Part of the reason I think fan fiction has become so popular, so much of fan fiction, it's not only just, oftentimes novel length projects that are free, it's novel length projects that are free that are entirely self-indulgent. And I will just say this, when people say, I don't have the time to make art because I work and all of this, plenty of people who write fan fiction are working people, and some of them are students in university and things like that, and they're still writing whatever self-indulgent thing that they're writing, and they're enjoying themselves because that's what you do. I haven't written fan fiction in a while, I'm sorry to say, or read it, to be honest. I've got a lot going on. Obviously, I make these YouTube videos when I can find the time, but I also am in school myself, and I am working on a book right now. And I've actually made a lot of great progress this month. And what else have I got going on? Oh, I have a day job. So like I've got a couple things, just a few sprinkled here and there that I'm doing right now. And so that naturally means that like, hey, look, everyone has different levels of time. Everyone has different levels of energy. I am certainly someone who, hey, I'm tired a lot, especially after work. So it can be tricky to find the time to do XYZ. And I get that. I get that so hard. So don't, think that I'm trying to dismiss anyone who says I don't have time for XYZ. And I will just say, I don't know. It's just, I think we need more people making self-indulgent art that are not just people who have the money to do so. I think more working people have to like find a way to make self-indulgent art. And look, if you're already living with your parents, even if you have to pay them rent or whatever, use that time to make self-indulgent art after work. Like, just, you got to do it, girl. You got to make self-indulgent music. I don't care if it's good. I don't give a shit if it's good. Make the self-indulgent music, put it out. Who cares if it's cringe and embarrassing? Like, just, we got to do it. We got to do it because life's too short, man, to not make cringe, self-indulgent art, self-indulgent music, self-indulgent videos, self-indulgent, just whatever the fuck writing, I think we need more self-indulgent shit. I think we need to kill the inner cringe and the inner critic that says you should be ashamed of whatever thing you've made. Make something weird, make something self-indulgent. I mean, look, Star Wars exists because of self-indulgent, nostalgia. Like, Star Wars was inspired by sci-fi films of the 1950s. So like you can be cringe and self-indulgent and make stuff that makes you happy and be wildly successful, or you can just do it because you want to do it. You can do it because you think it's fun. I mean, a lot of people, I recently was getting into there's all this talk about the indie web and how a lot of people are making like very early 2000s inspired web pages. And there is something so fun to me about the sort of early 2000s web pages and the early 2000s, like the blinkies and sparklies and just all of these things that were like so much a part of my childhood, and seeing them come back and seeing people make them. And it's hideous and tacky, and I love it. I've really gotten so much, that's kind of why I love DIY. I love seeing shit that's kind of tacky and kind of hideous. I mean, at this point, even if I see a car that's like bright lemon yellow, I'm like, I would never, but I love that you have that because it's unusual. Every car is like white, silver, black, and fucking cement gray. I could probably do a whole video ranting about cars that are cement gray, but I truly just don't have the energy. But I will say this. So for me, I think what I'm trying to unpack is the idea that success has to look one way, that it has to be tied to financials, that it has to be tied to view count or making the algorithm happy. I think for me, and the conversation that I'd like to have with you all is A, how are you trying to redefine success? And B, can we all kind of agree with ourselves that we can be successful as long as we're doing something that makes us happy. As long as we're making art that makes us happy, or we're making content that makes it doesn't even have to be art. I mean, art is so subjective as a term. Makeup is art. Do weird makeup. I don't fucking care if it's good. Do like a smudgy eye that's just, very gothic. Bring back emos. Bring back fucking emos, okay? We need weird streaks in your hair and makeup that's just kind of smudgy. Remember when guys wore just like black smudgy eyeshadow and eyeliner and like looked sad and had their bangs kind of just down? Like, God, bring that back. I'm so tired of the ultra muscular alpha bro who wakes up at 3 a.m. to fucking work out. Get bent, bud. I don't have time for that. I mean, I don't date men anyway, but still, like, fuck that noise. I don't have the energy. I want weird, cringe art. I want art that is kind of ugly, kind of messy. I mean, for fuck's sake, Picasso probably would not have been popular if he'd happened today, because it's weird and it's not like, it probably wouldn't be algorithm friendly, or maybe it would. I don't know. It's hard to tell. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's the conversation that I want to have. I want to have a conversation about switching the narrative, but also all of us being able to, redefine what success means for us, redefine what it means to be successful, redefine what it means to have success. And, as an artist, especially, I think redefining what success means to us and what it looks like to us. Obviously, I understand the desire to, have enough money that you don't have to work a day job. My current day job that I work is a 45-minute drive one way. And then on the way home, it's anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half because of traffic. And that's fucking miserable and it's fucking exhausting. And, I've worked plenty of jobs that I hated. And then I was like, God, I just want to make enough money that I don't have to ever come back here. And so, like, I understand that. I understand more than anyone, the desire to make money off of your art and support yourself with your art, not just because people say that you can't, but also because it is kind of the ultimate fuck you, right? Because everyone says that you can't, but it's also because it allows you to just do what you love and you never have to worry about it. You never have to worry about, can I afford to do this? Can I afford to just do this? You know what I mean? I think so much of the dream of being an artist is being able to just do that and just be able to support yourself on your art. And that is like the dream. That's the fantasy. That is what we all strive for and long for. And I get that, especially, living in this capitalist society. And so that is kind of another conversation that I want to have, is like, how do we divorce what success means and what it looks like and what we've associated with it for a long time from the monetary, when in reality, I think we all kind of feel trapped in the very nature of capitalism, which says that you have to make money in order to survive. And therefore, in order to make art, you have to be able to make money somehow, right? I talked about this in my last video, right? That like, there's a certain level of security that's required to make art. Like, you have to be able to feel like, I have a roof over my head and I'm not worried about losing that. I have food in my stomach and I'm not worried about losing that. It's very first world problems, and it's very, lower middle class problems to say, like, I want to make art, but, like you have to have a certain level of security to make art, right? You have to have a certain level of mental stability to make art. You have to have a certain level of, physical, mental, emotional security. Your Maslow's hierarchy of needs really have to be met at like the base levels in order to be able to create art. Like, that's just a reality. If you don't have anywhere to sleep, you're not going to be able to make art. If you don't have any food, you're not going to be able to make art. If you don't have, if your mental health is so fucked up that are just, that's constantly, it takes all of that just to stay alive. It's going to be very hard to create art. I know, I've been there. So in a certain, to some degree, it's like, that's kind of like, there is a level of privilege to all of this conversation. I recognize that. I do. A certain level of security is required in order to make art. I would say, and even, especially to say, I want, success to not look like having to chase the algorithm and not having to chase, trying to find money all the time in order to do what I want. There is a level of privilege that goes into that statement. A lot of people who make content, especially on YouTube, regardless of how big they are, still have to kind of make decisions about whether or not they can, deal with this. And I recently heard something, I think it was on Courtney Ack's podcast, that like having certain morals is often a privileged position, right? If you are someone who's, fighting day to day, paycheck to paycheck, really just trying to get by, and, you have an option to do an ad read for like, Halliburton or, what is one of those companies? God, I can't even think of the companies, because I recently remember seeing that they had donated to a Pride campaign. It wasn't Halliburton, it was Lockheed Martin, right? If you are someone who's struggling to survive and it's like, I can do an ad read for Lockheed Martin, or I can, pay rent this week, or I should say, or I can risk not being able to pay rent this week, it is very privileged to say, I'm going to, have morals and scruples rather than pay my rent. You know what I mean? Like, that's obviously a very like specific thing. And I'm going to argue that Lockheed Martin has probably never asked a YouTuber to do an ad. I don't fucking know. But anyway, you know what I mean, though? It's like this idea of, if you are someone who's struggling, if you are someone who is in a position where you need money to be able to survive, having the, moral fortitude to say, I am not going to take a certain ad read because this company is bad, quote unquote. Although I don't think there's any company who's like morally perfect at this point, but that's a whole other conversation. But like having the, moral whatever to do that, it's a privileged position, right? Like, that's just what it is. So my saying that, success should not be based on money and should not be based on me having to chase an algorithm or me trying to do this, that is a very privileged position. And I understand that. I do understand that. I am privileged in a lot of ways, and I'm very, very lucky in so many ways. Like, I do understand that. On the other hand, like anyone else, still trying to make ends meet, still trying to make a living, still trying to do what I got to do. And so like, there is a dichotomy there, right? I don't want to get into, we don't want to do the, oppression Olympics. I don't think that helps anyone. I don't think it helps to say this person has it harder, this person has it harder. A lot of it's relative. The point is, at the end of the day, I do recognize that on the one hand, it is kind of a privileged position to say success should not be completely predicated on making money. Success should be, I think, predicated on doing things that make you happy. That said, I think, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the conversation that I want to have, is like, how do we, because I really don't know, how do we balance the idea of wanting success to be, making weird shit that makes you happy with making shit that's going to make you money so that you don't have to, work a job that you fucking hate. You know what I mean? Like, how do we balance those things? I don't really know. I honestly don't. Like, I would like to say that I do, but I don't. And so, I guess part of this too, I said, is that I want to talk about something that I'm grateful for every time I do this podcast. I think it's going to be weekly, but maybe it'll be bi-weekly. And so something that I am grateful for is this platform in general. I know that a lot of people complain about YouTube. I have complained about YouTube. I've complained about the fact that I don't understand the algorithm all the time. And sometimes I don't feel entirely appreciated by the algorithm. But I'm grateful that we live in a world where this platform does exist so that people can make content and do things. And there is that potential where you can become, a viral sensation and make money. And you can go from having to work a job that you hate to being able to be successful. And whether or not, still using that term successful, it's kind of hard to break, and whether or not we can say that that should be the ultimate goal of YouTube, and that, people who grow up wanting to be YouTubers, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, we can have that conversation. We can have the conversation about, that's a whole other thing. But I will say, I am grateful that this exists. I am grateful that the internet exists in such a way that I or anyone else can put my content out there, whether anyone sees it or not. There is always the potential that people will see it. There's the potential that people will see and enjoy your work and appreciate it in a way that did not always exist, right? And so I am grateful for that. I'm grateful that we have that. Do I think, I'd like to see things kind of go back to Zines and personal websites and blogs that aren't made by Squarespace because they all look the fucking same. Like, I want a site that looks like it's from 1999. I want a site that looks like it's just whatever tacky design that I felt like making, or hand drawn, or whatever, just something cool and fun and original and different. And so I am grateful that, we can find those things, and I'm grateful that exists. And what I'm affirming to myself is I am affirming that I am going to continue to make things that make me happy. I'm going to continue working to make things that I enjoy, regardless of whether or not they are, algorithm friendly, regardless of whether or not they are going to be successful. I'm going to make things that I love, that I'm passionate about, and that make me happy. That's what I'm affirming. Alrighty. So yeah, that's kind of everything. This is the first podcast. I cannot say for certain if I'm going to make more video essays. I've got topics that I kind of want to talk about. I do miss, I really enjoyed making that video about witch talk. So maybe I will make another one at some point. If you have any ideas or suggestions of videos that I can make besides this podcast and different podcasts that or episodes that I'm going to be making in future, do let me know. If you are watching or if you're listening to this, this is also going to be a video podcast on youtube.com/Narcissa Deville. You can also find me at Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, not Twitter anymore, Facebook, if you're still there, all at Narcissa Deville. You can also find me at Patreon at patreon.com/Narcissa patreon.com/Narcissa Deville. That is where I'm doing, behind the scenes content, members only content. And of course, I want to make videos that are very exclusive to Patreon. I want to talk about things that are going to be, Patreon specific videos. So if you have topics you'd like to suggest over there, please feel free to join me. You can also suggest topics that I should talk about for the podcast or just in general for YouTube. I would love to hear them. I always love new ideas. And until next time, what's my new outro for this? That's the perfect outro. What's my new outro for this? And until next time, stay devilish and see you next Thursday. Whee! Oh, and happy Pride, everyone. Putting the demon back in Pride Month. I hope you're having a good Pride. I guess this video will come out probably tomorrow by the time this comes out. And Pride is almost over. I cannot believe it. It's been a weird one. It's been a surreal one, is what it's been. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, stay weird, queers. Wow, that sounded really weird. I need a